Hi, everybody. It's D Knight back at you with the second part of the last chapter of my book, My Whirlwind Lives Navigating Decades of Storms. This section leads with fighting against fascists and for democracy. The January 6th mob assault in Washington was historic. The New York Times said the assault on the Capitol was the first by a large hostile group of invaders since the British sacked the building in 1814. Black Lives Matter activists noted the police response to white gun-toting protesters storming the Capitol behind the Confederate flag, while some D.C. police fraternized and took selfies with them. The mother of Michael Brown, killed by police in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, told the Washington Post the lack of a police response was stunning. No shooting, no rubber bullets, no tear gas, nothing like we have seen. Trump declared, "We will never give up. We will never concede, and that's what this is all about." Representative Liz Cheney said there's no question that the president formed the mob, incited the mob, addressed the mob. He lit the flames. Trump tweeted to the protesters, "We love you. You're very special." He later denounced them, backpedaling as pressure mounted against him. Facebook and Twitter took down his words and suspended his accounts. Not quite an impeachment, but it was a hint that Trump's time was over for a while. Trump was finally impeached for a second time, a historic first. But it fizzled. The impeachment, that is. In mid-November, following dozens of failed lawsuits to invalidate votes in key states, Trump invited state legislators to the White House, pushing them to refuse to certify the election outcome and then nominate new slates of electors. Prior to Thanksgiving, Trump supporters made death threats to election officials in Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Nevada. In Milwaukee, former Sheriff David Clark declared, "We need a chapter of the Proud Boys in Wisconsin because they're the only ones with the courage to get in the face of Black Lives Matter." Courage? In Michigan, 10 days after the election, 14 men were charged in a plot to kidnap the governor and take over the Capitol building with 200 combatants who would stage a week-long series of televised executions of public officials. Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel declared, "We are one of the few states that does not ban guns in our state capitol building, and clearly there have been threats made on the lives of our legislators." She added, "In April, we had armed gunmen, some of them the same defendants in this case, that were hovering over state senators with long guns, screaming and yelling at them as they were deliberating. The defendants were charged, arraigned, indicted, and released on bond." Faced with these fascistic threats, labor councils across the country announced plans for a general strike if Trump were to succeed in his attempted coup. These were not the first strike pledges. The People's Strike movement was launched on May Day 2020 by the Jackson Cooperative of Jackson, Mississippi. After, they say, we saw working class people launch a wave of labor strike and rent strike actions across the world in response to the severe negligence in the face of the pandemic. People's Strikes builds on the tidal wave of mass marches and rallies led by the Movement for Black Lives in the wake of police murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and many others. The millions of Unionists and Black Lives Matter marchers vastly outnumber the proto-fascists in Washington and around the country, even though assault weapons and police support favor the fascists. The Biden team looks less horrifying than Trump's shock troops, of course, but consider this. Richard Stingel, head of Biden's transition team for the U.S. Agency for Global Media, has branded himself chief propagandist. He is urging the government to use propaganda against its own population and says It should rethink the First Amendment that guarantees freedom of speech, press, and assembly. In 2018, he stated, having once been almost a First Amendment absolutist, I have really moved my position on it because I just think for practical reasons in society, we have to kind of rethink some of those things. Are those practical reasons in society the continuous mass protests against police killings? Thousands of people have been jailed for protesting and have waited months for charges to be dismissed, while thousands more face continued charges for exercising their First Amendment rights. Regarding people's rights and mass incarceration, neither Biden nor Harris inspire confidence. Biden has specifically rejected calls to defund the police. Harris was a hardline California Attorney General. Her primary challenger, Tulsi Gabbard, said during the 2020 TV debates she put over 1,500 people in jail for marijuana violations and laughed about it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California, and she fought to keep the cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way. At the Chicago Ideas Forum in 2011, Harris mocked people who say build more schools, less jails, put money into education, not prisons. She says, there's a fundamental problem with that approach. You still haven't addressed why I have 3 padlocks on my front door. There should be a broad consensus that there should be serious and severe and swift consequences to crime. And she wasn't talking about crime in Washington, D.C. Harris is unlikely to help reverse mass incarceration or deal with the poverty that breeds crime. Major financial support for Harris came from Hillary Clinton's biggest backers, who saw Clinton's chances for a 2020 rerun falling flat. Clinton responded to Gabbard's expose of Harris and to her anti-war stance by hinting she was a Russian agent. Gabbard responded with a defamation suit against Clinton. Harris doesn't come close to repudiating Clinton's bloody record as Secretary of State, fostering fascist coups in Ukraine and Honduras, ordering the murder of President Gaddafi of Libya and cackling about it, and engineering the disastrous U.S. intervention in Syria. Next section is called Our Task is to Hit the Ground Running. Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor, author of From Black Lives Matter to Black Liberation, told a New York City DSA convention in August 2020, no matter who wins in November, our task is to hit the ground running. Ground as in streets. Key demands are defund the police, protest continued police murders, and a full program of people's recovery. We need to differentiate our socialism from Trump's red baiting. Bernie Sanders says we need a 21st century economic bill of rights, a job that pays a living wage, quality health care, a complete education, affordable housing, a clean environment, and a secure retirement. This is an echo of Franklin D. Roosevelt's Economic Bill of Rights, proposed in his January 1944 State of the Union address. FDR said, the political rights guaranteed in the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, had proved inadequate to assure us equality in the pursuit of happiness. He said the government should guarantee to all people in the country employment, clothing, and leisure with enough income to support them, farmers' rights to a fair income, freedom from unfair competition and monopolies for small business owners, housing, medical care, social security, and education for all. Biden launched his presidency looking like FDR, a flurry of progressive executive orders and a bold, big spending plan. We like the plan. We fought for it. Now we need to make sure it really happens. But we can't expect to get it without a massive popular struggle, more obvious every day. just as it took mass mobilizations and strikes led by the left to win FDR's New Deal. We need a broad popular alliance. The Sunrise Movement says by joining together black, brown, and white, and Asian to organize and demand the change we need, we'll make our voices heard in record numbers on the streets and with our votes. The U.S. Peace Council says our only way forward is to stay mobilized, demanding justice and accountability against racist killer cops in defense of migrants rounded up and deported, in solidarity with LGBTQ and disabled people, and against endless wars, sanctions, and occupations. Biden has rejected the call to stop racist, militarized policing, to invest in alternatives to policing while cutting police budgets and establishing democratic community control of the police. That just means we have to keep fighting for these things, in the streets, workplaces, and city halls across the country. As Colin Kaepernick wrote recently, instead of police and prisons, we can create space for budgets to be reinvested directly into communities to address mental health need, homelessness and houselessness, access to education, and job creation, as well as community-based methods of accountability. This is a future that centers the needs of the people, a future that will make us safer, healthier, and truly free. We should mix determination with optimism. There's a dramatic change of mood in the country and rejection of Trump's fascistic measures, with or without Trump. There is a new determination among labor leaders to fight. DSA has forged an alliance with the militant United Electrical Workers Union, UE, which says the labor movement we need must be a militant movement built from the bottom up, and it must be based on clear-cut principles, aggressive struggle, rank-and-file control, political independence, international solidarity, and uniting all workers. We can use the alliance with UE to help build fighting unions everywhere, organizing drives of Amazon, Walmart, Tyson Foods, and McDonald's workers, while bolstering militant teachers, nurses, longshore transport and construction workers, and all manufacturing workers. This could feel like a CIO revival. What's most important? What is most important? Is control of Congress the key? There's a debate brewing about how change happens. All progressives would welcome a Congress and president that could deliver Medicare for all, a massive jobs program, a Green New Deal, police reform, and all the rest. But if the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s proved one thing, it's that people marching by the thousands, tens, and hundreds of thousands are the main force for change. FDR's New Deal needed intense mass pressure in the streets and factories, which was delivered by huge campaigns organized by the left. The movement to defund or abolish the police didn't emerge from the 2020 elections. It was the hurricane of people power in the streets that did it. Power sparked by Black Lives Matter multiplied exponentially when working people and youth of all colors and nationalities marched together. The explosive marches focused on defund and abolish. Going forward, they will tend to morph into broader struggles on all the issues. It began to happen in the hundreds of strikes, including local wildcats and stoppages throughout 2020, and in the tenant struggles and rent strikes, which have intensified everywhere. The tenant fight is especially urgent, as millions of people face evictions if federal and state governments fail to intervene. The late December 2020 extension of eviction moratoriums in New York and some other states was a start, but it mainly kicked the can a few blocks down the road. Tenants won this moratorium, but the moratorium is good news, but it's not a solution to the pandemic housing crisis. We're deeply disappointed that unlike previous proposals which would have protected tenants for up to a year after the state of emergency were to end, the moratorium only lasts a short time. And by the way, it's ending as we speak. We also know that any bill that doesn't address back rent is not enough. Albany must still cancel rent along with this eviction moratorium. If they do not, they're potentially condemning hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers to financial ruin as a result of the pandemic. The coalition mobilized tens of thousands of tenants to push the New York State Assembly to pass the moratorium extension. New York City DSA launched a Tax the Rich and House the Poor campaign to get the funds for both housing and green energy in New York. Such a movement needs to be national. There are an estimated 7 to 14 million households at risk of eviction nationally, owing about $20 billion in back rent. There was $1.3 billion in rent relief in the December 2020 federal relief package, not nearly enough to stem a homelessness crisis that threatens to explode from more than 600,000 to many times that number. Any failure to address the housing crisis will merely intensify the looming real estate credit crisis, which will lead to bank crises that hang over Biden's debut like an impending tornado. But it will take a people's tornado to force federal, state, and local governments to deal with it. The strange, ever-rising stock market is not a reflection of a healthy economy. It actually shows that the trillions the Fed pumped into the corporations had nowhere to go in the real economy. So the investor class dumped them onto the stock market. Somebody said the market right now is clearly foaming at the mouth, as one market analyst told the New York Times just before Christmas 2020. Another said, we're seeing the kind of craziness that I don't think has been in existence since the internet bubble in early 2000. Another said, it's not as obvious a bubble as 20 years ago, but we're close to bubble territory. Now there's a question for the Biden administration. Can it deliver a recovery plan that will mobilize these billions of dollars together with trillions from the military budget and new taxes to put people back to work, converting the country to sustainable energy and guaranteeing health care? It's an existential question, really do or die for Biden. But that's true also for us. A mass people's movement needs to manifest the strength to force real change. As Keeanga-Yamahtta Taylor says, we need to hit the ground running. And we need to find ways to transform Biden's new beginning into a future that really puts people in charge. That's the end of the chapter, just the beginning of the struggle. Thank you very much for your attention. I'll be back to you with another chapter very soon. Thanks again. Bye for now. This is D. Knight, author of My Whirlwind Lives, Navigating Decades of Storms, out soon from Guernica World Editions. Bye-bye.